Good afternoon, students. Today we'll have a lecture on food hygiene and food adulteration. So the contents of today's lecture are milk hygiene, meat hygiene, fish, egg, fruits and vegetables, sanitation of eating places, food handlers and food adulteration. So what is food hygiene? Food hygiene, they are the conditions and measures which are necessary to ensure the safety of food from its production to its consumption. So you have to keep this in mind that we need to keep these hygienic conditions from where the food is produced up to the place where it is consumed. And this food hygiene, we would discuss it under various headings like the milk hygiene, the meat hygiene, egg, and then about fruits and vegetables. Now, taking them one by one, what is milk hygiene? Milk hygiene, we can discuss it under various headings like what are the sources of infection. The source of infection could be the dairy animal itself, or it could be the handler who is handling uh, the milk. Then the environmental conditions, which could include many things like the vessels or the water which is there, the flies, the dust. So they are all these, they compromise the uh, hygiene of the milk, and they could act as a source of infection to milk. Then coming to the diseases that could be transmitted by milk. So the milk-borne diseases could be classified under infections of animals uh, that can be transmitted to man. Okay, so it is the uh, infection of that animal itself. And then we have infections which are primary to man and which could only be transmitted by milk. Now let's look at the diseases one by one. So infections of animals that could be transmitted to man are, we'll only enumerate these diseases. The important ones being tuberculosis, brucella, staphylococcus, salmonellosis and Q fever. Less important diseases are cowpox, anthrax, foot and mouth diseases, leptospirosis and tick-borne encephalitis. Then moving to infections which are mainly primary to man, but they could be transmitted by milk. So these are typhoid and paratyphoid fevers. You have shigellosis, cholera, then enteropathogenic E. coli. We have certain other non-diarrheal diseases also which could be transmitted by milk. That is the streptococci, staphylococcal food poisoning, diphtheria, tuberculosis, enterovirus, and viral hepatitis. Okay, so these are the diseases which are primary to man, which could be transmitted by milk. So you need to know these uh, the names of these diseases. So if you've been asked about milk-borne diseases, you need to classify them in this ways and give examples. A word about clean and safe milk. So the most important essential factor is that to have clean and safe milk is that the animal has to be healthy. Okay, the healthy udder of these animals is very important. And then secondly is the premises where the animal is living. Okay, that condition also has to be sanitary. And after that is the vessel in which we are uh, collecting milk, that has to be sterile. And few other important points where which you should consider is how the person is handling overall his uh, the person when he's handling and when he is milking. So the hands of his has to be clean. Then another important point is the milk, once it is drawn, it has to be immediately cooled below 10 degrees Celsius. So this is one important point, so that the bacterial growth and all that will be taken care of. Okay, so these are few important points regarding clean and safe milk. There is another one test, the methylene blue reduction test, which will give us an idea about the bacteria or the level of contamination of this milk. So we'll discuss this test again with uh, I'll discuss about this in my other slide. Pasteurization of milk. Now, what is pasteurization is that it is defined as the heating of milk to such temperatures and for such period of time, um, which is actually required to destroy any pathogens that may be present while causing very minimal changes in the composition, flavor, and nutritive value. So, this was a definition given by WHO. So, what do you understand by this is you need to heat milk for certain period, okay, and then you're going to uh, and there is a fixed temperature and a fixed time, okay. So here we are speaking about destroying the pathogens, and the second important factor here is that the composition, flavor, all that, and the nutritive value has to be maintained. For pasteurization of milk we have three different methods. The first one being Holder's method or the VAT method, VAT, okay. So this method could be used uh, for small and rural communities, and for for usually now it's not being used for larger cities, okay. So what is being done in this Holders method is here the temperature which is told is from 63 to 66 degrees Celsius, and here the milk is heated for 30 minutes, okay. And after that what is needed to be done is the milk is to be quickly cooled to 5 degrees Celsius, right. So this is our first method. Now moving to the second method of pasteurization, that is the high temperature and short time method, that is HTST, okay. It is high temperature and short time. What do we do here? The recommended temperature here is 72 degrees Celsius, okay, and here it is held at that temperature for not less than 15 seconds, and then you need to rapidly cool it to 4 degrees Celsius. Okay. Now this is the most widely used method, and when you have large quantities of milk per hour, then you can use this method for pasteurization. The third method is the ultra high temperature method. Okay. So in this milk is rapidly heated, usually in two stages. The second stage usually is under pressure. Here it is heated up to 125 degrees Celsius for few seconds, and then it is rapidly cooled and bottled as quickly as possible. So a quick uh, revision of these three methods of pasteurization. Okay, we'll quickly see what these three methods are. First is the Holders method, then we have the high temperature and short time method, then we have the ultra high temperature method. Okay, so in the first one it is 63 to 66 degrees Celsius. You're heating it for 30 minutes and then rapidly cooling it to 5 degrees Celsius. In the second method, it is 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds and then rapidly cooling it to 4 degrees Celsius. And in the third one, it's done in two stages. The second one usually under pressure, and then the temperature used here is 125 degrees Celsius, which is for few seconds, and then you're going to rapidly cool it and bottle it. Pasteurization kills around 90% of the bacteria, including heat resistance, tubercle bacillus, and Q fever organisms. But it does not kill thermoduric bacteria nor the bacterial spores. So, but rapid cooling is very important because whatever the multiplication of bacteria can take place if the heat increases, so that could be taken care of. So it has to be cooled up to 4 degrees Celsius up to it reaches the consumer. Okay, and usually the hygienically produced pasteurized milk has a keeping quality of around 8 to 12 hours only. Okay, if it is maintained at around 18 degrees Celsius. Now coming to the test for pasteurization. We have different tests for pasteurization, that is the phosphatase test, the standard plate count, the coliform count, and the methylene blue reduction test. I even discussed this test earlier, the methylene blue reduction test. So this is uh, it's I cannot tell that it is an alternative to the bacterial count, but you could get an idea of how much the how many bacteria are present or the load of the contamination. What exactly you do in this methylene blue reduction test is, uh, as I actually told you, that it is an indirect method for detection of microorganisms in milk. So here once you, it's usually done in these centers where milk is accepted for pasteurization. And what exactly is done is, when you conduct this test, a definite quantity of this methylene blue is added to 10 ml of milk, and then the sample are held at a uniform temperature of 37 degrees Celsius until the blue color has disappeared. So the milk which remains blue for a longer period is the best milk. And this ways you can compare and the different samples and see how much is the contamination. Okay, now coming to the other tests of pasteurization. The first one, what I told, is the phosphatase test. Okay, this test is widely used to check the efficiency of pasteurization. That usually it depends on the fact that raw milk contains an enzyme called phosphatase, and which is destroyed on heating at a temperature which corresponds very closely to the standard time and the temperature which is required for pasteurization. Usually it is a 60 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. This phosphatase is completely destroyed. So if the test, now this test is used to detect inadequate pasteurization or any addition of raw milk. So if this enzyme is there, then it means that uh, any this is added, that is the raw milk, or the pasteurization was not conducted properly. Next being the standard plate count. uh, Now the bacteriological quality of pasteurized milk is determined by the standard plate count. Okay, uh, so a rough cutoff or a limit of 30,000 bacterial count per ml of pasteurized milk. So this is usually the criteria which is given. Then the coliform count. This is another test where usually the coliform organisms are usually completely destroyed by pasteurization. So if their presence is there, that means the pasteurization process was not adequately done. Meat hygiene. So what is meat? Is the various tissues of animal origin. So having meat which has been infested or infected by any of these tapeworms or any bacteria, so having that meat could transmit diseases. Like we have tapeworm infestations, you have different diseases like the Taenia solium, Taenia saginata, Trichinella spiralis. So all these are different tapeworm infestations that could affect human. Then the bacterial infections like anthrax, actinomycosis, tuberculosis, and food poisoning. Now coming to meat inspection. So proper inspection has to be done by this veterinary staff, and when this inspection is done is the ante-mortem and the post-mortem examination of the animal is done. So ante-mortem we see for various different conditions, like if there is exhaustion or if the animal is pregnant, sheep pox, foot rot, actinomycosis, brucella, if the animal has fever or any diarrheal disease. So in that case, that meat should not be taken or the animal should not be slaughtered. Now, post-mortem examination you see for liver flukes, any abscess, if there are some nodules, tuberculosis. So all this thing has to be examined, and then the animal, the meat should be taken depending on the findings which are there. Then which is a good meat? Okay, good meat is usually which is not pale pink or very deep purple. It's not slimy, does not shrink on cooking, it's firm and elastic with agreeable odor. Okay, so all these are qualities of a good meat. There are separate standards for the slaughterhouses. Now, what is a slaughterhouse? Slaughterhouse is a place where this animal is slaughtered or killed. So, now under the Public Health Act, that is 1955, we have this separate guidelines for these slaughterhouses. And the different headings under which these guidelines are is the location, structure, disposal of waste, water supply, the instrument, any other animal centering, and how the meat is stored. Now, first is the location. Usually, it has to be little away from the residential areas. The floor and walls usually up to 3 feet has to be impervious, and the blood and all the waste which are being generated, they should not be directly drained into the public sewers, and they have to be collected separately. About water supply, there has to be continuous water supply in that area or in the slaughterhouse. And then the animal has to be examined properly. Then how this meat has to be stored is uh, proper temperatures have to be maintained. Usually if it is for a overnight storage, it has to be below 5 degrees Celsius. And some other points about it are any other animal, okay, which is not being slaughtered, cannot be should not be allowed to enter the slaughterhouse. Okay. Then while transporting this meat, the another important thing that has to be remembered is that it has to be a fly proof covered van usually. So all these standards have to be maintained in these slaughterhouses. Coming to fish hygiene. Now, fish has a tendency that it usually loses its freshness because of autolysis that takes place in the fish. Okay. Uh, so, and this could lead to the bacterial growth and it can get infected very soon. So, what are the signs of fresh fish? Usually, fish which is fresh, they are firm and stiff to touch, and when they are held flat on hand, the tail usually doesn't drop off. The other important things that you need to know is the gills are usually bright red, the eyes are actually clear and prominent. A few another important points regarding fish that we should know about the diseases that could be transmitted is the fish is an intermediate host of tapeworm and Dibotryocephalus lapis. So it's you should know that it is an intermediate host and it could transmit this disease. And another important thing is the sewage bacteria and the viruses, especially the hepatitis type A, they could be concentrated in the shellfish such as oysters. And fish may even carry some other infections like Vibrio parahemolyticus, then Salmonella infection, Clostridium botulinum type E. So these are certain diseases that the fish could transmit and cause fish poisoning. A word about tinned fishes. So it's very important for us to inspect the tin in which we get these tinned fish. Firstly, the tin, what we see, it should not be too old and rusty. So this is one important criteria. Look for that. And another important point is see if it is blown out. So what does this indicate? If it's blown out, that the fish inside has decomposed and the fish has spoiled. Okay, so when anybody is using tinned fish, so they need to see for all these things when they are consuming this fish. Now the next important point when it comes to food hygiene is the egg hygiene. Usually freshly laid eggs are sterile, but if the uh, there are cracks in the shell, so at that time uh, it could transmit salmonella. Another important point is though inside of the egg is sterile, but while laying the egg could be contaminated by the feces of the hen. So this point has to be kept in mind. And in case the shell is cracked, then you need to be more cautious. Uh, Next important point is about fruits and vegetables. Now, fruits and vegetables, usually you can have them raw or cooked. If it's cooked, then there are very less chances of this fruit or vegetable transmitting the disease. But when we have this in the raw form, then it can spread pathogenic organisms or protozoa, helminths. So this should be kept in mind. The fruits and vegetables should be thoroughly washed because these days there is lot of uh, concern because the vegetables are sometimes even grown on sewage water. So these fruits and vegetables can spread pathogenic organisms, protozoa, and helminths. Sanitation of eating places. There are few standards which have been suggested for restaurants and eating houses in India under the Model Public Health Act, which was given in 1955. So these standards are on different criteria, like based on the location, floors, rooms, kitchen, storage of cooked food, storage of uncooked food stuffs, furniture, then disposal of refuse, water supply, and washing facilities. Let's see these points one by one. Now, location, the most important point is that it should not be very close to something which is unhygienic or filthy, or open drain. So, all these places should not be very close to a place where eating facilities, okay, the eating place which is there. Now, moving to the floors. In floors, the most important point that has to be remembered is it has to be impervious and which has to be very easy to clean. Now, moving to rooms. Under rooms, you have different subheadings that you need to know. One is the size, that it should not be less than 100 square feet, and it should give a accommodation for maximum of 10 people. Then coming to the walls, at least up to 3 feet, it has to be impervious, and usually smooth. Uh, the corners has to be rounded and which could be easily, which is easy to wash. There has to be adequate lighting and ventilation in that place. Now moving on to other criteria, that is the kitchen. In kitchen again you have different subheadings. The first is the floor space area, minimum 60 square feet. The window opening should be around 25% of the floor area. And again, floor has to be impervious, smooth, easy to clean. It has to be non-slippery. This is one important point which you should remember here. And the doors and windows should be rat proof, fly proof, or if possible which should be easy to, or it should be the self closing type of doors. And about it has to have proper ventilation, that is at least 2% of the floor area has to be there apart from the smoke pipes which are there. Then the food, there has to be proper facility for the storage of cooked and uncooked food stuff. In uncooked, the perishable and non-perishable should be separated. uh, Another important point here is the area where it is stored, there rats or flies should not easily enter. Then the furniture should be strong and easy to clean. The waste and all should be collected, covered in these impervious bins and disposed of at least twice a day. There has to be independent source and adequate water supply which is continuous and safe. The washing facilities has to be provided. Now coming to the food handlers. Another very important point is the food handlers can transmit various diseases. So one important point is a complete medical examination has to be done of these people who will be handling food, and they have to be seen if they have any diseases like the diarrheas or dysentery, typhoid, paratyphoid fevers, enteroviruses, viral hepatitis, protozoal cyst, so eggs of helminths if present, strepto, staphylococcal infection, salmonellosis. So it's a list of diseases where you need to consider before taking somebody who will be handling food. So a complete medical examination has to be done. Other than this, a day-to-day health appraisal has to be done if they have any ear infection or skin infections, anything as of that sort. So they should, usually it should be told to them that they will not be handling food. And then another very important point is the health education aspect. A proper health education on hygiene has to be provided to these food handlers. And in the health education, what you can involve is the hygiene of hands, very important. Proper hand washing, when they use washrooms they need to wash their hand, when they're cooking they need to wash their hand very often. So all this has to be told to them, especially the ones who are there cooking. So how you need to teach them how to scrub their hands and clean their hands properly. Hair again, especially women having long hair and all, they have to usually cover their hair so that the hair doesn't enter the food. And overall health education has to be given on how they should have uh, uh, the uh, clean clothes and all. Okay, the overalls what they're wearing should be uh, clean. Then the other habits which is there is uh, coughing and sneezing in the vicinity of food, licking with the fingers. So all this should be avoided. Food adulteration. By definition, it is addition or removal of any substance to or from food such that the natural composition and quality of food substance are affected. So this is the definition of food adulteration. Now what is a food adulterant? Any material which is or could be employed for making the food unsafe or substandard or misbranded or containing extraneous material. So then you could call it a adulterant. Now, food is considered to be adulterated if there is evidence of substandard quality, there is substitution by cheaper substance, abstraction of any constituent of article, then preparation or storage in unsanitary conditions, presence of poisonous ingredients, use of coloring agents or preservatives in excess of prescribed limits, and quality or purity below the prescribed standards. So, if any of this is there, then the food could be included or told that it is food adulterated. Examples in our day-to-day practice are even adding water to milk is adulterating because you're changing the quality. Removal of fat from milk or addition of detergents like starch or wheat flour to the milk. So all this could is food adulteration. Some other common food adulterants are most of the cereals. This is a very common example and you too might have come across this, that there is addition of mud and grit in cereals. Dals like atur dal, which is much costlier, it could be adulterated with kesari dal or any other dyes. Then dhania, okay, so that is the coriander seeds. So that could be again contaminated or adulterated with the horse dung. Then we have a black pepper, which could be adulterated with papaya seeds. We have chili powder, and it could be adulterated with brick powder. Even the tea what we have, it could be adulterated with grain husk, or sometimes what they do is uh, the tea powder which is already used, okay, the used tea is dried and then it's mixed with the usual tea powder. So this is also adulteration. Then milk is adulterated with water. Mustard seeds could be adulterated with these pricky poppy seeds. Then sweets could be adulterated with non-permitted colors, or the pure ghee could be adulterated with the vanaspati ghee. So these are few common examples of food adulteration. So we have different standards for that you need to maintain, and they are the Codex Alimentarius Commission, the PFA standard, the ECMARC standard, and the ISI standard. Now, how could you prevent food adulteration? Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, which is a central legislation act. So it protects the public from poisonous and harmful foods. It prevents the sale of substandard foods. It protects the interest of consumers by eliminating fraudulent practices, and it prevents, curbs, and checks the rampant adulteration of foodstuff. This act prohibits the manufacture, sale, and distribution of adulterated food and also contaminated and misbranded food. Then we had many other things, the subsequent acts, that is the food product, fruit product order, that is 1955. Then we have a few others, that is the vegetable oil product order, that is 1947. The meat food products order, that is 1973. Milk and milk product orders, that is 1992. Then edible oil packaging regulations in 1998. Then about the Food Safety and Standard Act of 2006. So, in this, the food safety officer is given the authority to collect food samples that he suspects are adulterated and he should send for analysis. The food business officer can inform the concerned authority if he feels that the food is adulterated or contaminated. Then the consumer can also, this is important, that he can also get the food analyzed from food analyst if he suspects contamination or food adulteration. Penalties for food adulteration under FSSA Act. So penalty up to 2 lakh rupees if the adulterant is not injurious to health, and penalty not exceeding 10 lakh rupees if the adulterant is injurious to health. And even the court can issue prohibition order on these convicted FBOs. That is prohibition on the use of process of treatment for the purpose of food businesses, prohibition on the use of premises equipment for the purpose of food business. Then cancellation of license could be done, then recall of food from market, name and place of the person who is guilty, and could be imposed in newspapers. To summarize, today we spoke about food hygiene under various headings, that is the milk hygiene, the meat hygiene, fish and egg hygiene. We spoke about the eating places and the food handlers. After that, we spoke about food adulteration. What is food adulteration? Few examples and the different acts which are involved with food adulteration. Thank you.